And you're trying to give the young people something that will help them, yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Hello again, and thanks for tuning into the podcast once again. My name is Drew Perkins, and I'm the Director of TeachThought Professional Development, and I'm happy to have you join us for what we try to do, which is to have heterodox and complex and interesting and sometimes difficult conversations about things that will hopefully help you as an educator better prepare students for the modern world. Speaking of preparing students for the modern world, our professional development services are, of course, all geared towards that, and everything that we do is through the lens of inquiry and personalized to meet the needs of you and your school and your district. So if you are looking for ways to better prepare your students for the modern world, please navigate on over to wegrowteachers.com, where you'll find our workshops and our services, including project-based learning, differentiated instruction, and a whole host of inquiry-centered and student-focused professional development options for your school. In this episode, I spoke with Richard Rusczyk, who is the founder and CEO of Art of Problem Solving, which was founded in 2003 to teach avid math students in an innovative, interactive way. Our conversation weaved in and out between the ideas of problem solving in general and those of problem solving in the math disciplines, and the ways in which math is taught in our classrooms, and the ways in which his programs and the art of problem solving and the work that they do might be an alternative or an option for those students who need maybe a little bit more headroom in their math instruction and learning than they're getting in their regular classrooms. Some of our conversation also focused on some of the best practices or ways in which we might meet diverse learners in online education settings, and the role of inquiry and ways in which our teaching and learning might be incentivized or disincentivized by some ideas or external factors that we kind of discussed and pondered. So, an interesting conversation, and I hope you find it helpful. All right, Richard, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on. We're going to talk about the art of problem solving and your work and who knows what else as we kind of dive into the conversation. But as I usually like to do, I want to give you an opportunity to say hello and give our listeners a little bit of info about who you are so they know who they're listening to.
All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've been listening to your show for a little while and really enjoy your conversations and hope I can contribute to your audience. I guess as a little background, back when I was in middle and high school, I was really into math, and I was fortunate enough to have a few special teachers who realized that and made opportunities for me outside the classroom. I didn't really appreciate or understand how valuable that was until I got to college and found that those experiences prepared me for college in ways most of my college classmates were not prepared, by showing me challenges and showing me a lot of things I couldn't do and had to overcome those challenges. So while I was in college, I started co-writing a couple of math textbooks for kids who were interested in math contests. And then after college, I dropped out of grad school because I really wanted to be a high school teacher. And I learned something that and most of your listeners know very well. Teaching is hard.
It is.
Really
not getting any easier, it doesn't seem.
I can't imagine how difficult it is now. I was 22. Now you're looking at me right now. I'm 50 now. So you can imagine what I looked like when I was 22. I looked like I was 10. So discipline in the classroom was tough. But what was even harder was reaching the students who had tapped out of learning already. And I wasn't equipped to do that, but I was equipped to teach the students who were like me, who were very excited and still very engaged in the classroom. So after a semester of being beaten up in the classroom, I went and did something easier. I traded bonds.
Figuratively, I hope.
Figuratively, yes. I went and did something easier for 4 years, traded bonds for 4 years, but it kept calling, the urge to do something, to build something bigger. by then the internet had come along. And so a few years after I left trading bonds, we started Art of Problem Solving. So this is now 2003. But that's before Khan Academy. It's even before Facebook. We've been doing this for a long time. We started with an online school, just put up a sign saying, we're going to, if you're looking for a greater challenge than a regular curriculum gives you, this is the place to come. So that, a couple of online classes in our first summer turned into a series of textbooks, turned into a full curriculum for middle and high school, eventually went down to elementary school. Now we have 2 online schools. We go, elementary, middle, high school with books and mathematics. We started to branch out into language arts, into science, a little bit of computer science. We have 10 learning centers around the country and a variety of online resources. We work with schools, we work with parents. And like I said, we've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, and I happened to check out at least part of a conversation you did have with, I guess, Sal Khan, because you have some similarities, and I think even in that conversation, you could probably recall it better than I, that you kind of discussed a little bit of the ways in which you might intersect and overlap and be different in some of those things. So maybe it's a good time to sort of unpack that briefly before we get going anymore.
In terms of like the intersection with Khan Academy, so part of it is, and I think Sal even kind of commented in that, is to some extent in some spaces we pick up where Sal leaves off, particularly in the older classes. Now for our younger students, we reach a broader range of students. Khan Academy is more often used. We're used as a supplement and also as a full curriculum. So we have a broader range of resources than you might find on Khan Academy. Mm-hmm. We have books, for instance, and we run classes of our own. Our primary audience is math. Most of our students are kind of high interest students.
Right. So you have. You sort of mentioned basically an online option for students, and are they from a variety of different places, or where do you draw your population?
All over. So our online community that's for middle and high school students, probably the largest online community of problem solvers, definitely in the English-speaking world, but I think in the world, and they're international. They're from all over. Mm-hmm. That started, like the core of that group originally was students who were preparing for high school Olympiads. So that's where we got the international. But from there, so that's middle and high school. Elementary school, we have an online automated learning system that's a lot like Khan Academy in terms of its structure. I shouldn't say, in terms of its delivery mechanism. And that's important because the one main thing I've learned in the last 20 years is how differently different kids learn. Mm. And something you and your teachers know really well is that nothing works for everybody. And honestly, I don't think much works for large portions of the students. So in order to engage a wide range of students, we need to operate in many different lanes. Some kids like books. I was a book learner. Give me a book, put me in a corner, I'm good. Put me in front of a video, that's not going to work. Put me in a classroom, that might not work either. Right. There are other kids who need that social experience. They need to see eyeballs. They need to see other kids. They need to, form a relationship with an instructor. So that's why we start classes, and why we're starting to invest more in learning more about classrooms. Mm-hmm. Classrooms that are not our classrooms, because the most important resource in reaching students is that teacher in the classroom.
If you've listened, I probably talked about my daughters, and let's use my daughters as an example. So they could instead of, or as a supplement, or as part of their regular K-12 experience, select Art of Problem Solving in your academy, or the I don't know the exact naming that you want to use. I saw is it Beast Academy or something like that?
Yeah, Beast Academy. Beast Academy is elementary school.
Okay.
And then when we talk about Art of Problem Solving or AOPS Online, that's our online school for middle and high school. And then we have textbooks that go along with that. AOPS Academy, those are our learning centers that are around the country. And there's also now an online version of that we started due to the pandemic when those all had to move online.
So they could basically enroll there as an alternative to their regular schooling?
As an alternative or in addition to. Students use it in different ways. So some homeschoolers use it as their primary curriculum. Some students, they're going to school, they're doing their thing in school, they're coming to us. And, they're doing school because they have to do school. They're coming to us for the greater challenge that they're looking for than they might be able to get in a classroom. because, you've been in the classroom, you got 26 students or 32 students, or even if they're only 15, there may be a few students there who are who really are kind of pushing the boundaries on the top end. And particularly now coming out of the pandemic, where that spread is so wide, given the disparate outcomes of the last 18, 24 months, teachers have to focus on those kids who are really, really struggling. And, so some of those kids that are going to be looking for a greater challenge, they're going to come to us, whether it be online or in person.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And my oldest daughter especially has experienced exactly that. And as the school year began, they were in person and have been mostly in person, which is not necessarily important in this conversation, just to kind of see, you've got this classroom full of students, and my daughter was really sort of struggling with and complaining about, we're learning stuff that we've already learned, and I'm trying to extend grace to the teacher, and while I'm talking with her, it's like, are you doing things because of the sort of what might be labeled COVID learning loss? And so in lots of ways, that's I'm trying to catch those students up. And of course, my daughter, at least anecdotally and according to her, she knows all of it, right? And I don't know if that's exactly true, but a ninth grader knows everything and knows nothing at the same time, and did nothing, and all of the things that come with a ninth grader. But yeah, that's an interesting challenge, and we are getting, as professional development providers, lots of requests, a much larger request for differentiated instruction workshops and services, in I would say in lots of ways because of that. So it is curious. So one thing that you sort of mentioned, you didn't say it this way, but I'm curious, like recognizing the different ways in which people, or kids and people, because kids are people too, learn, that how you think about that, and what kind of, if you could unpack that a little bit. And just as a side note, I am getting ready to talk with, and probably not as much about this because they've got a different book, but Howard Gardner, who of course people would know from sort of the learning styles and that kind of thing. And I'm curious to at least address some of that on a minor level with him. But I'm curious what you found out. And again, I don't want to say you said different learning styles, because that's a trigger word for some.
Yeah. I'm not very good at the vocabulary of the education world. Plus, it keeps changing.
It does.
Mainly, I just mean having different avenues available to a student from which they can learn. So I'll take our two online schools as an example. One of our online schools, the newer one that we started during the pandemic, is on Zoom. It's it's video, it's audio. It's the kids are talking there and they can see each other. Our other online school is very different. It's all text and images. There's no audio. There's no video, and that's a little bit mind blowing when you first see it. And people will look at it at first and be like, "Oh, this is never going to work." And we started that in 2003 for. Obviously, then the technology might not really have been there to do an audio video, but I also started it that way for pedagogical reasons. Kids can read a lot faster than they can listen. They can also reread, and they can't re-listen. So for a kid that's really dialed in, that's important as well, that don't need the kind of, the flash and bang of audio and video, that they're already dialed in. Like, this is a really good, efficient mechanism for them to learn, to relearn if they need to reread. It enables them to step aside, work separately with an assistant, or just put their head down and work on a problem for a little while, tune out of class, and not fear falling way behind, because they can catch up pretty quickly. So that's a different mechanism. It works great for some students, does not work for other students. All of our classes, or not all of them, but many of our classes, are supplemented with videos, because some kids learn from video. I do a lot of the videos, and when I'm doing the videos, I don't think I'm teaching, because I don't learn from videos. And I think people can think they're learning from a video, but they don't really learn until they're actually doing math. I feel like I'm doing PR for math, but the kids tell me they're learning. I don't know what's actually happening. But there are kids who need that. There are some kids who just need good problems. You give them good problems, step back, step in when they need help. It's going to be great. But there are other kids that they're going to need more scaffolding. They're going to need more handling. They're going to need each other. They're going to need access to an instructor. And I think to say that different kids don't have different approaches to learning, whatever, I want to stay away from all the buzzwords.
Right.
Like every teacher knows this, right? Every teacher knows this kid needs a little more direct instruction. This kid, if you let her figure it out for a little while, she's going to be really happy. And you're going to back off a little bit. Or these three, they need to be working together and they really go really well. That one likes to sit in a corner and is going to be great. Okay. And you're going to mix it up a little bit. You're going to challenge students with different mechanisms, because sometimes they'll discover something new.
Right.
But so that's largely my career over the last 19 years has been developing the same material over and over and over again, but delivered in different avenues, in different mechanisms.
Well, that's interesting, and I hadn't anticipated this being a part of the conversation, but it strikes me as something that your experience and I suppose accompanying wisdom might be useful as teachers and even us as professional development providers. Think about how do we engage students in online settings, and as we have acknowledged, there are a number of ways in which one might do that: synchronous, asynchronous, and video and non-video, and those kinds of things. So, like thinking about maybe there's some wisdom or some ideas, or like what have you found, just as sort of blanket generalizations, maybe as a start, and maybe there's some deep dives. Like we have like an effective online teaching workshop that stresses some things. I'm curious what if you were to say, if we're going to do effective online instruction, and there's a difference between instruction and a whole course, and maybe we would want to dive into that, but like what are the important questions to ask maybe and to consider as one thinks about that? What do we really need to kind of keep in mind to do that effectively, and what have you found in your travels?
So first and foremost, I'm not supposed to say this as someone who large portion of our work is online. Online education does not work for everybody. And honestly, it doesn't work for a whole lot of people. And that's the promise of ed tech, at least so far, is wildly overblown. So when a technology company comes to you, or a nonprofit or whatever it is, it comes, I've got the solution, it's going to fix your classroom.
I never get those emails.
Yeah, and your reaction is the right one, is skepticism. So, I mean, part of it is making sure that this is a good mechanism for the student. And there are some students for whom online learning is absolutely wonderful, whether it be that the medium that they're actually working with is good, or simply the really deeply engaged, I really want to learn this stuff learner. Online education has really unlocked those kids in ways that are, that on the ed tech says we're going to unlock everybody. This little slice of students, they have really been empowered by this, and that's been part of our story. So, we've worked with the top students, mostly in the U.S., but some around the world, but mostly in the U.S. for 17, 18, 19 years now. The last 7 years, we've won the International Math Olympiad 4 times. They're all our students. You go back 20 years before you get to another year the United States won. So this is, and we're not the only people they're working with. I want to be clear about that. And most of the credit goes to those kids. Most of those kids, credit goes to those kids talking to each other. They're connected online. So that's a very powerful thing. But trying to force every single kid to learn online, like that's not going to work. I just want to you got to come right out and say it's not going to work. There are going to be kids for whom it's going to be a tool, but the whole idea that you're just going to throw all the kids on the computers when they walk in the room, I view that as a huge mistake, because you're giving up the most powerful thing about the kids being in the room, is that they are in the room together. And you see it when the kids get on computers, like the more social ones that, they'll scooch up and get next to each other and start talking to each other. And that's great. But for the most part, once you what it's like, you look at your screen and everything else disappears. And that, for me, where that really hit home, when we started our learning centers, I had this idea that I was going to replicate what we did in our online school in the learning center. Because one of the things that's really magical about our old online school that's all text and images is the kids are talking all the time. They're constantly sending in messages. We have a cue, it comes to the instructor. So I, as an instructor, it's like I'm reading their minds. I know when I've made a mistake. I can feel, it's like, you look around a classroom, yeah, you can sometimes read a kid, but when the kids are all talking to you, immediately, I got to back up, or this student here is racing ahead, hand them to an assistant, and that assistant, she'll help them along. And it's a kind of a magical experience. You're crafting a story in the main room. It's a whole lot of fun. So I was going to do this in the classroom. We were going to get these devices. All the kids would be on devices, and I would be at the front of the room, and I'd have my thing, and I'd see all the kids' devices up there, and I'd be like, I'd know everything that's going on. So we got it. We had a Promethean board sent to us. We set it up in our room. It was going to be a whole lot of fun. And they had the devices. They were going to do a demo for us. And the minute I looked down at my device, I was like, oh, I made a terrible mistake. The whole room disappeared. The only thing that was in front of me was the screen. So I'm like, you got to take this Promethean board back. And they didn't even know how to do it because they had never had one returned before. So sent that back, and we're like, all right, we're pointing the kids at each other because we've got them in the room. And that was that I think that experience of being so excited of, oh, I'm going to solve this problem with technology. And the minute I experienced it myself and realizing there are limits. It's a tool, but it is not the answer. And I think that's something to think about in terms of online education. It's a tool. Yeah. For most kids, it's not the answer, and find the right way to be utilizing it as a tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about the sort of motivated students resonates with every teacher. I mean, the motivated student in person is usually, I can't imagine a situation in which it wouldn't be more easy. I mean, that solves a lot of problems in any sort of teacher-student sort of relationship, and in that learning relationship. And I think about YouTube or Khan Academy or any of the videos you all might have. You say, all right, I want to try to figure out how do I do something, and if I'm really motivated to figure out how to do it, I'll go to YouTube and find a tutorial. And therein lies part of the rub, is how do we get students to identify and say, all right, I need to learn this. And that's a lot of the things that when we think about inquiry and constructivist teaching and education and project-based learning, is some of those kinds of questions, like how do we ask a question, have them engage in something in a project that is interesting to them, that gets them to ask and then sort of want to answer the questions that are important to us as teachers. And that's a tricky thing, especially in some very dry situations or with content that aren't, they don't see a real need for. That certainly is a challenge. And in thinking even further, like one of the struggles that I have, or I think is an important distinction, is when we do things online, one of the things that is a challenge is that conversation that a really skillful teacher, facilitator can have and should have with the learner, to be able to sort of know when to push and when to pull. Whereas when it's, especially if it's asynchronous, then it seems to me there's a sort of limit to the amount of learning, or the kind of learning. There could be sort of the basic levels of learning, but it's much more challenging to get into more deeper learning and more critical thinking and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I mean, the asynchronous is really a challenge. Like asynchronous, I mean, you want to be there when the student's having the problem, and that's and you want to be helpful, but not too helpful. But you want that to be there. Mm-hmm. So in our online classes, they're live. We do have asynchronous options, but it's much smaller. And even there, we have an office hours, a concept of office hours, where kids can post on the message board and get their questions answered fairly quickly. Not too quickly, because I think it's important to make the kids think. Or often they'll ask a question, we'll ask a question, they'll ask a question, we'll ask a question before, and then at the end you tighten it all up and summarize. There's so much to unpack there. I mean, I think part of getting the child engaged, one, and often I'm talking to parents about this, and it's easier for them to execute this than for teachers, is you've just got to expose kids to a lot of different opportunities. And the goal is to find one or two that lights them up and they want to go. They want to dig very, very deep in it. Because this is like, in my mind, there are two main things you want in education to accomplish. One is baseline literacy in a lot of different things. for everyone. Like that's what most of our education system is designed around. Like that's the goal. The second is the ability to reach real expertise in something. That's a transferable skill, that ability to go really, really deep, to confront challenges that you don't think you can overcome. You spend 2 years doing it. That's what I did with math contests. You spend 2 years figuring out how to do it, and you get past it. And now, well, when you look at the next thing you really want to do, you know that you can get there. It's going to take some time, but you know you can get there. And this is that second thing. That second strand does not exist in most schools. You know, it's just not the way we're structured.
Well, that's interesting, and I make a distinction often between, you know, calling somebody an expert and then talking about expertise. And I don't know if you have any insight or if that makes any sense to you. Like the ways in which, like somebody would say, they'll introduce me, he's a project-based learning expert, which to me, I don't particularly care for, because I think, well, that means I must have all the answers, and I certainly don't. I certainly can be wrong, and I'm always learning. And as I think about that, the term expert makes me a bit uncomfortable. And I say, what I have is expertise in an area, and I've thought about this and I've learned about it probably more than you have as whoever that audience is, or at least I would hope so. And that's why you're paying me to be here or whatever, right? That I can then help you think about this in ways that you otherwise wouldn't, because, and this is true, I think of teachers as well. The more times, I mean, I was working with a teacher in Wisconsin recently, and she was going to be teaching a course she hadn't taught before, and she said, I don't even know where to start because I've never taught this. And you know that she doesn't have the expertise that comes with teaching a course a few times, and then you go, oh, I know what the questions are that we should be addressing. I know the important pieces here. And so when you talk about expertise, I don't know if that distinction rings and has any resonance for you, or if you think about it any differently.
No, I mean, I like that. So, I mean, I guess what I would describe as the second strand is learning how to develop expertise in something. And you're right, because like if you feel like if you get to the point where somebody else is calling you an expert, you're probably someone who's like, oh, you see all the things. You're like, I really don't understand that, or that other thing over there. And those problems are hard. I'm going to work on them, but maybe I'll solve one of them or get closer on one of them. I mean, this is the problem of education, right? Like there's no point at which I'm going to be like, yeah, I got it now. Right. Well, I mean, there are some things, right? There's a sense of like, you know your multiplication tables, those kinds of things, and that gets at your sort of literacy. But then, and this is something, and I've actually got a couple pieces, one that I'm going to be publishing on our site, and then one that may be published somewhere else, and I'm sort of thinking about the role of inquiry and sort of what I think is a false dichotomy between sort of direct and explicit instruction and inquiry. And one of the things that I think is a part of that, a wrinkle that gets missed, is sort of the difference between, and I'm curious how you think about knowledge and just the concept of knowledge, the idea of focal knowledge versus tacit knowledge. And, there are other ways to think about knowledge. And I like the framework of Bloom's taxonomy just because it's simple and one can sort of think through that pretty simply and easily, even if it might have some flaws. So when we talk about that focal knowledge and saying, all right, want to teach this explicit skill or fact or piece of knowledge just for this explicit task versus that tacit knowledge, which is a bit deeper and connected in other ways, and then could be transferable in lots of different situations. So, like, how do you, when you think about your courses and the work that you're doing, how do you think about knowledge? Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't. I've seen, again, I'm going to get some of the vocabulary words wrong, but I've seen some of the conversations around, do we need to teach students actual facts, core solid knowledge, or is it just, we're going to just teach them how to learn? You need both. You need both. Like you do need, there's some fun, you need your multiplication tables. Like, sure. You need some of these core skills, but we do definitely need kids to learn how to explore uncertain spaces, because that's where all the human jobs are. Certain spaces, they're all going to be done by these computers here. Those jobs are already gone, and they're going to be even more gone by the time our students get there. So when you set students up to compete with these computers, you're setting them up for failure. So we do have to teach them how to explore uncertain spaces and how to acquire new knowledge when they need it. but they also do need core knowledge. Like we do need to teach them the actual things.
Sure.
So, I mean, when you think about inquiry-based learning, which I feel like it means different things in different places, but like you want kids to go explore. You want to ask them questions and let them explore that space. You want them asking questions. Like when where they get an answer and then they're the one that says, oh, but what happens if we add this term in there? Well, now you've won. Now you can just kind of step back and watch the magic happen and step in every once in a while. But then there's this. So a lot of our instruction is in the form of questions. So our textbooks, middle school and high school, each section starts with questions. They're broken up, they're scaffolded. So the student has a fighting chance to get through it. And then we go through the lesson and like clear summaries. So, what people might call direct instruction, that's there. But I want the student fighting with the idea first a little bit. And then we're going to tighten it up and present them. It might be the way they thought about it. It might not be, and that's okay. That's another thing. When we see a student going in an interesting direction, we're like, great, let's roll with that and see where we end up.
Yeah, and again, I said it's a false dichotomy, and you're outlining it there, is like there very well should be, and in the inquiry experience, very, very likely should be and could be certainly direct instruction or explicit instruction, because what we've done is we've identified the question that is important thing that we really need to learn more about, and therein lies, I'm going to watch this video, or I'm going to have the teacher tell me, or whatever that explicit direct instruction might be. And that's one of the frustrations. It's sort of like this false dichotomy. But anyways, so when we think about, again, knowledge and sort of placing this in the STEM field, this is one of the things that I'm sure you've wrestled with and heard and probably had this discussion more times than you prefer to. But like the idea, I mean, like it's not arguable that we need multiplication tables, but it is arguable that we need, trigonometry and physics as adults, right? I mean, we're not using that. I took trig and calculus, and I don't use those, and I was not particularly gifted in those areas. Certainly, there are students that and careers and work that demand those skill sets, but that's a small segment of the population. But the other side of that, of course, is that there's nothing wrong with wrestling with that, because you're thinking and learning, and it's in some ways it's the analogy doesn't hold perfectly, but I think like if your brain is a muscle, which it's not exactly, but I think it works well enough. You say doesn't necessarily matter exactly if you are lifting 100 pounds of sand or metal or water. The fact that you are lifting that 100 pounds, whether it's physics or humanities, and certainly there are some differences in ways your brain might think or whatever, but like how do you think about that, and even the sort of pushback in the argument of like, well, we're holding some students back from matriculating even to college because they're struggling with math in high school, and that's not where they need to be. So I don't know how you think about that.
Oh, there's so much. What do the kids actually need? You want them to have some facility with numbers, percents, compound interest. These things are really important. Basic statistics, basic probability. So these are kind of core things, and some of those are things that most kids don't see. Like basic probability is something that is... Yeah,
statistics should be taught much more so. I think that argument is easy to make.
Yeah, and like, do all the kids need calculus? No. Do all the kids need trigonometry? Absolutely not. Do you want to expose them to it if they're ready for it? Absolutely, because that some of these ideas will really turn some students on. We should be showing kids discrete mathematics. This is the language of computers. It's still not part of the curriculum because the curriculum is 40 years behind the times. And the hard thing there is you've got to teach a generation of teachers, and then you can start teaching this mathematics. But you've got to start somewhere. But you've got to expose kids to it because it may turn them on. But what we really want the kids to do is to learn how to solve problems. Math is not the only way to do this. It is a very efficient way to do this because there's a very solid, clear feedback mechanism. When you have the right answer. This does not happen in a writing class. Writing is very subjective. It's very hard. I can't write and then know, nailed it. Put it in the computer. It says 5 out of 5, you got the right answer. You can't do that. Math has this feedback mechanism, which is really nice. Yes, it's got applications to other spaces, But it's this feedback mechanism that allows a kid to go pretty quickly. And you don't even have that in the sciences. The sciences, you don't quite have that sort of feedback mechanism either. And then, like, I saw this in college. It was very transferable. All my specialized learning in middle school and high school was in math. In college, all of my classes, physics, chemistry, engineering, computer science, philosophy, economics, anything that required taking fundamental ideas, combining them in novel ways to solve hard problems, I was drawing on what I learned with math. Just those kind of core skills, and being like, oh, this organic chemistry class that everybody's struggling with, there are really only 5 ideas. So I go in each test with 5 ideas, and I just keep combining them in different ways, and I'll eventually get there. But I learned how to abstract that from math. Again, not the only way to do it, not the only place to do it. But I think that is why you want to keep showing students when they're struggling. I think one of the things you want to do there is back up a little bit and find out why.
Right.
If you've taught any kids who are struggling with algebra, the problem is never x plus 2x. The problem is fractions. The problem is negative numbers. Like, if a kid is struggling in algebra class, usually the problem is 3 years earlier. And that's also another particularly when you're talking about the kind of core skills in an area. If they're struggling with core skills, usually the problem is 1 or 2 years earlier. If it's advanced problems, that's different. There you're trying to get them to learn how to overcome this struggle, how to face a problem that takes 45 minutes to solve, and not quit when they're 20 minutes in. And that's a different problem. But I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, well, and I'm reflecting, we're similar in age. I'm 52, and I'm reflecting back on my algebra struggles and the frustrations that I had, and sort of the moments that one has, or I imagine others had this as well, sort of like conceptually not being able to grasp it, and then having that aha moment finally, right? It's sort of like you're butting your head up against the wall, and in my case, I was like, I don't care, I don't want to do this, like who is this for? When am I ever going to use this kind of thing? And I'm sympathetic to that argument in some ways, because it is frustrating. But there is, to your point, I think a sort of, I guess, a heuristic, a way in which one might think about things that math and the thinking that comes with it provides, that I think it certainly has some similarities to other sort of disciplines, but is unique enough that it does bring value. And some people go on and first of all, I think it's important to recognize that some people, that exposure illuminates paths that they previously weren't aware of, and like, oh wow, this is exciting and I want to do that. But even for those, like, that didn't do that for me. I didn't pursue a career path that relied heavily on math, but it did certainly give me some opportunities to think about problem solving in ways that are different from, I was a political science degree. That was my undergrad, and the ways in which I think about things are probably not consistent with the ways you think about things, and sort of the heuristics and problem solving kind of thing, which I guess brings us to the question, like the art of problem solving, which is interesting because I assume, when I hear art of problem solving, I also then think, how is that different from the science and sort of the procedural pieces? Because I think about science of teaching and the art of teaching pretty clearly distinguishable, in that science of teaching is much more sort of the design, and then the art is the sort of application and facilitation. So unpack what is the process of the art of problem solving in your work?
Yeah, process might be a strong word there. I think and that's part of what the word art is for. Joyous problem solving it's jazz. It's not playing the scales. You need to play the scales to be able to play the notes of jazz. But the people that I know that are on the edges of mathematical ability, creativity, might be the most creative people I know. Like, they are creating stuff out of nothing. Like, you have this image of mathematics as there's a set of rules and you follow them. But that's the literacy version of mathematics. And then there's the version that's creating new knowledge. Basically everything we're doing in science and technology now, is built on top of mathematics. It's often 30 years old, and now the computers can actually execute the mathematics. And now we're doing, but it's a very creative And like, you start with a blank piece of paper, you start with a germ of an idea, and then you start to combine these ideas and try to build beautiful new things. It's a lot. My wife's an oil painter, and it's, I watch the way she works. There's a lot of craft. And if you don't have the craft, you're not going to produce good art.
Right.
There are people that might disagree with me on that, but I'm going to say they're wrong. If you don't have the craft, you're not going to create great art. But you also need to have that inspiration. You need to have that creativity. But that does get trained. Like, that comes from experience. It comes from doing things over and over again, and seeing connections that you might not have seen the first time. But you've done similar things a few times, and these two things start to be connected. This is probably something you've done in your political science work. You're like, okay, this thing that happened in Germany in 1953 looks a lot like this thing that happened in Britain in 1971. And you're probably sitting here thinking, no, those two times are very different. Could be true. I'm picking the dates at random. Right. But it's a similar kind of thing, is where you get to start to see patterns. And this is the art of problem solving, and this is a lot of what mathematics is about, is starting to extract and see patterns. Computer science is a lot like this as well. Science, like, I think a lot of the work you probably did in any area has this feature. But again, in math, one thing that's nice, particularly when you're training young kids to start thinking this way, is that feedback mechanism.
No, I think that's right. And the expertise that comes with the knowledge, and I think this is an important piece. And there again, coming back to sort of this argument about inquiry teaching, and what I think is a somewhat valid criticism in some ways, but shouldn't be, if you have to have significant knowledge and skill to be able to excel, to do great work, right? To, like you said, you have to know the scales to play great jazz. There are computer programs that can play jazz, but it's not great art, right? There are paint by numbers, but that's not great art. It can replicate it, it can look similar, and it can sound similar. And, I can do a math problem with significant help probably at this point, but it's not going to look like great art. So the ways in which you put those pieces together, those pieces of knowledge, and then I guess that the trick is, and this is not exclusive, I don't think, to math or science. It is like, how do we give students those opportunities to take the, again, using Bloom's taxonomy, the understand and remember, the knowledge, the understandings, and then do the middle pieces and the top piece, the create, the analyze, the evaluate, synthesize, those kinds of things with it. Because to me, that's how you figure out how to transfer it, and it shows up, and you start to see the through lines and the patterns, right? And I'm wondering how that looks in your work and in your mind, and how you. I mean, is there an intentional process there in your work with students?
I mean, it's, again, I think one of the hard things is it's very different from student to student. So, for example, one of the things you'll often see in places is this, having the student explain what they know. Write all your steps, show your work. And we have a lot of students who really struggle with that, because to them, what they're doing is obvious, and they don't understand why you're asking them to explain why 9 + 7 is 16. This is just an obvious fact of the universe to them. And that's okay. And this is what, so parents will tell me, my kid will never show their work, so I don't know if they really understand it. And my next question to them is, are they getting it right? And they'll say yes. And I'll say, then you don't have a problem yet. They'll start showing their work when they have to show their work in order to keep track of it themselves. So this is one of the things that is important. Like, if you're going to break things up and start thinking of, it's this, and it's this, and then it's this, and it's this, those steps are not the same for all the kids, and they don't happen at the same points of intellectual or mathematical or age development. Some kids at 9 are struggling. They need to reason through and write down the steps. Other kids, it's not until they're 14 that they need to do this. Everyone hits this point. Like, it happens. I had a student once who, there's a series of tests that determine the US team. And on the next to last test, the 1 year he took it, he was crushed. He got 7 out of 15 correct, which was still quite a good score. But he was pretty sure that he knew how to do 13 of the problems. So his dad, brought him to him, and he's like, he's really disappointed, and I'd like you to help him through this. And I'm like, okay, well, just show me your work. He had done all 15 problems, and these are really hard problems. The test is 3 hours long. He had done all 15 problems on one sheet, one side of one sheet of paper, which is an absurd thing to do. When I took these tests, I had one sheet of paper per problem, and both sides. So that's what I told him. I told him, all right, Teddy, next year, you're one sheet of paper per problem. Take your time, and then your work will be organized, your thinking will be organized, and you'll do better. And he was the only perfect score the next year. And the only change he made, he learned some math along the way, but the only change he made was those tactics. It's going to be hard to get those kids to make those changes until they need to make them, until they accept that they need to take them. Now, again, I'm talking about, there are different populations of students who are going to accept this information in different ways. So I'm skeptical. You can hear my skepticism of any sort of system. There is a system. This is how it works. I believe kids are very different, and I believe it's also context dependent. Kids in this environment are going to behave differently than the same kids in this environment. So I think that if you're not going to walk into teaching in a classroom with a bit of that mindset, it's going to be harder. Now, there are places that really do lock down the classroom, and this is the way we run. Kids that will thrive in that system will thrive in that system. The kids that won't. And those have great results.
So one of the things we run into, I'm curious how this lands with you. So again, we do lots of project-based learning work, and one of the areas in which the academic areas in which we find the most, I don't say pushback, or the challenge of I'm trying to come up with authentic projects or authentic audience, and giving the students opportunities to work on authentic problems and projects and that kind of thing. And math, and especially higher level math, struggles with that. Those teachers tend to struggle with it a bit more. One of the I guess anecdotal or maybe a hypothesis that's been offered, and it seems to make some sense to me, and I've mentioned it a time or two, but I wonder if this is actually true, or how true this is, and if so, how we sort of overcome it, is that math teachers tend to be taught to how to teach math, but they haven't, in lots of cases, used math in sort of the outside the academic real world. And so they have a really hard time, or it's more challenging for them to come up with or generate ideas of how that math, because when I talk with teachers and I say, how is this content important as adults use it, whether it's math or social studies or whatever, how does it land in the real world? Can we replicate that in a way that makes sense and gives the students a sort of authentic pursuit in the work and reason for learning this? And math teachers, they do tend to struggle with that. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about how math teachers are trained, and how that might look different, or maybe you think it's actually that it shouldn't change. I don't know.
Yeah, I have not seen project-based learning done well in math. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe at the earlier level, but at the advanced level, there's so much to learn that if you're going to start talking about the applications, all right, first, if we're going to start talking about the applications of math to, say, building a bridge, well, first we have to learn material science. And there's so many other pieces that you need before you can then even put in the math, that what happens is you end up with a very synthetic thing. It's fake, and the kids know it's fake. And the kids don't respond well to fake things in the classroom. And I hear you. There are going to be kids who are going to be they're tapped out unless you show them why they should care. I think in statistics, you may be able to get around that. In statistics, you can bring really interesting real world problems, and you don't have to explain a bunch of other stuff around it. Boom, you've got some statistics. But the vast majority of other things, calculus, trigonometry, in order to have a really interesting problem, you need a whole lot of extra knowledge before you can start to do it. I think the place where there's a lot of room for project-based learning is computer science, because there are really interesting problems there that are really hard, and you can break them down. And you can be all right, so we're going to learn this kind of data structure to do this piece of it, this kind of data structure to do that, this one. So I think that's a rich area for it, where all of that external information is part of the stuff you're wanting to teach anyway. It's built into the problem.
Yep.
I think that's where your challenge is in math and that's where you end up. And for that, you may turn on some students. They may get really excited, but they're excited about parts of it that's not math. You're not winning the game of math in that, and you might be turning off the math students. You're probably not teaching math. You might be inspiring a bit of it, maybe, I don't know. But that, I see this in schools that focus on project-based learning a lot. In the math space, they often find they need to supplement it. I think that, I think there's room for it. I think there's a place for project-based learning. Those kids come out strong collaborators, strong communicators, but they need something else to shore up their math skills. And it's just, it's a tool. Project-based learning is a tool.
Yeah, well, I would say that there's the way that I think about authenticity, and there's sometimes they say, well, let's just do problem-based learning, which is less authentic. In my distinction is that it lacks an authentic audience, and there's some real value there. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Project Lead the Way, and my kids have done it and have found some value in that. I have tried to encourage their teachers to say, how can we maybe find an authentic audience that can give them feedback? And that leans back into the expertise thing and say, so if I would say authenticity, there's sort of three ways that I think about, three general ways, like solving a real world problem. And that can be really difficult, like a calculus or physics kind of setting, because of the things that you mentioned. Like there's some real complexity and there's a rigidity to the curriculum and so on and so forth. But then a sort of second level is, are they, because I, as you said earlier, like we want them to develop expertise. We want them to think like physicists or engineers or whatever the case may be. So can they do work that is in that academic and intellectual area and share it with somebody like yourself who can give authentic expertise feedback to them so that they can sort of check their thinking, right? And that, to me, there's a level of authenticity there that is much easier for, those higher level math kinds of settings. And so what that does, in my understanding, the way that I think about it is, then if I'm trying to do this work and I'm going to share it with you, I have to think about, you're the audience, what are the things that I'm trying to do that would meet your needs, which means I have to identify those needs, and that means gives me an opportunity to check, say, how well have I met those needs, and that's an inquiry process that really lends itself to the sort of overall pursuit of sort of problem solving that I think we both agree is something that they need in life, whether it's in math or outside of math, that kind of thing. So, that's one of the things, because I do think it can be, it can show up in project-based learning as they feel like it's just a simulation. It's a game. Like this is not real. This is a fake. And I think you're right. And I tell teachers, like, once you start pretending, with high school students especially, you're running a really high risk of them going, oh, this is BS.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is the challenge. And I think, past a certain point with mathematics, the kids have to be. The goal is to get them to love it for the sake of the subject. And I know that that's not going to work with every kid, but if you're going to create pathways for these kids in an intellectual discipline that is deeply math related, there has to be a little bit of that voluntary acceptance of unnecessary obstacles in them. I still do programming problems for fun. Like it's just part of my genetic coding. It's just something I do. Not everybody's going to do that, obviously. But I think to get to the edges of a lot of these spaces, you do need that. And to develop the skills, if you're going to wrap around a lot of stuff at it, boy, that's a lot of friction. That's going to, there are going to be the students who are going to go out to the edges. They don't need all that wrapper, and they don't want it. They're not going to respond that well to it. There will be students who will, though. There will be students. And again, I think those you're going to have to embed. I think you're going to have much more success with mathematical modeling, things that are in the statistical and computer programming space. Because there, again, you can give very real problems.
Right.
And you don't have to be like, well, we're going to assume, like, obviously we do this in physics all the time. We're going to assume a human is a sphere and let's go from there. But with mathematical modeling, there's a lot of rich stuff you can do.
Yeah.
Without that.
Yeah, well, and not to belabor the point, but we say what we want students to do in project-based learning is to start at the top. We want them to do we want them to create something, design, develop, or something like that, some verb that is synonymous with create, and that sort of kickstarts the process. And I think that to your point, like some of the areas of math lend itself really well to that, and then some don't as much. And my advocacy for project-based learning is primarily because of the inquiry skills that it builds, and certainly an opportunity to build in significant knowledge and content. But if you are not looking to focus on that, then by all means, don't do a project. Like, there are times in which you say, this kid really wants to learn, quantum physics. So teach quantum physics. You don't have to do that. It's sort of like any assessment that we do. If I say, what are you trying to accomplish? Then look at the tool that you're going to use, right? And that is not necessarily project-based learning in whatever given setting. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, we use project-based learning very deeply in our language arts curriculum for our learning centers. Like, we started off with fact-based, blah, 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 and we had tests and we had the things, and we've transitioned over the past couple of years to every 9 weeks, there's a 9-week project. And this is the framework the students are working in. And it is landing much better. The kids, they have this big picture that they're working within. And that structure works really well in these language arts classes. And at the end of the 9 weeks, they have, a gem that they've shined. But that kind of structure, at least we have not found a way to make that work in math the way we do that in language arts. The way I suspect as we start building out our computer science, I think our computer sgoing is going to look a lot like that as well. We're going to have, here's a big thing. We're going to create a game that beats you at Othello.
Right.
You're going to write a program that you can't beat. And, they're not going to do that overnight. Well, maybe one student is, but most of them are not. And we're going to sequence it out, and they're going to work through the steps.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
So if I'm a student or an educator or educational leader or even maybe a parent, what's the elevator pitch for AOPS? I'll use the lingo, right? AOPS, and there are different ways, right? There's obviously some different pathways. So let's unpack that a little bit.
All right. So elementary school is our Beast Academy. So this is beastacademy.com. We have a series of books. The textbooks, guidebooks, are comic books. And we did that. I mean, obviously comic books are fun, but we have pedagogical reasons for that. One is you can't lecture a third grader. It just does not work. You need to have a conversation. And a comic book simulates those conversations. So the kids put themselves emotionally in the place, and we get to model struggle. We get to model kids challenging each other, working with each other, all these sorts of things. And of course, we have workbooks we have a lot of puzzles. We do a lot of puzzle-based learning that honestly, I think are probably similar in spirit to kind of your project-based learning, in the sense that hidden under the hood of these puzzles is a lot of practice. To solve this puzzle, you're going to have to add two-digit numbers a bunch of times. But you're doing it in service of a bigger problem that you're actually really excited about. And that bigger problem, the first step is trying to figure out where to start, which is, I think, one of the real powers of project-based learning is you have to figure out where to start. So with a second grader in math, that looks like a math puzzle. So we have these books. We have an online learning system that goes with it. And we do have a lot of schools now using that as a supplement, primarily for their more advanced learners. And this online system, a lot of parents use this at home with their kids. For older students, our oldest site is aops.com or artofproblemsolving.com. That has our online school. So online classes starting at kind of pre-algebra and moving on up. You have a student that's really interested in math competitions. That's a separate strand, but we have an awful lot of those students as well. A few science classes, a few computer science classes. We also have our learning centers, 10 cities around the country. Those have language arts, and we have an online version of that as well. That's all in video and audio, which at this point is mostly focused on younger learners. So those are the kind of different avenues. And we have the middle school and high school textbooks as well, different avenues through which you can reach us. We have a bunch of free resources on the aops.com site as well, the free learning system for middle school and videos. And a lot of our work is direct with parents. And just in the past few years, we started working with a lot more schools and a few school districts. Again, they're focusing primarily on younger learners, younger, more advanced learners.
And so you said some of it is free, which means that some of it is not free. So like, what does that look like just in general? I mean, we don't need a price sheet, but
yeah. I mean, books are books. So, they're kind of standard in the market. The online learning system is just like a lot of your online learning systems for younger kids. It's on the order, I think, $100 a year or something like that for the online learning system. The classes are different structures. So the classes are, for the online, the text and image, we have those classes tend to have a few more students in them and extra teachers. It's just the way we can run this system. It's a funny thing. The class works much better with 50 students than with 15. It's a really interesting dynamic. Whereas the video classes will not work with 50 students. You need to only have 15. So those might be, I don't know, call it $400 for a 12 or 15 week course for the text and image base. The ones that are video and our online learning systems, they tend to be more in the $800-900 range for, say, an 18-week course. Is the structure of those. And there are usually textbooks attached to all of those courses.
Gotcha. And so then do you have schools, do they tend to engage when schools engage, do they tend to engage with, so like all in, or would there be some of their students that have access to it as an option, or how does that tend to look?
A lot of them tend to look like for Beast Academy, they'll get it as a supplement and use it with a subset of their students. So they might have a differentiation. It's a differentiation solution is how it's used in a lot of schools. So they have one set of students that are using Khan Academy, and they have this set of students that are using Beast Academy. And we are starting the process of building it out into a full solution that can serve all the students. But right now it's primarily used as a supplement for those high-end students. There are some schools using it as a full curriculum. There are some schools that have adopted our middle and high school books as a full curriculum in select pieces, like maybe the pre-algebra or maybe the geometry book. We don't have a full suite of support materials for that at this point. So you need a teacher that's really, that's going to put in the work to produce those materials on their own.
Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about? I'm looking at your site and kind of popping around, noticing you have a pretty extensive, list of folks or large team and lots of different roles. But what, if anything, have we not talked about that we should have talked about, or that you want to mention? And obviously, we got to get all of the links and websites and places where they can find you, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered a whole lot of ground. I think that the main thing I just encourage the teachers out there who have students getting hundreds on all their tests. Those kids aren't success stories yet. And I had one of my classmates wrote me when I started Art of Problem Solving, and he just wrote me as a simple note, said, I wish your website and materials had existed when I was a student, because I got hundreds all the way through all my middle and high school math tests. And then I walked into my first year classes at Princeton, and it was a bewildering experience and poisoned him on math for years. I reflect on that a lot, because that student's teachers probably still think of him as one of their great successes, perfect scores and everything, went to Princeton. And they don't have the feedback mechanism. He didn't go back to those schools and say, hey, I wasn't ready for that. And he could have been. And I saw this happen to a lot of my classmates. It still happens. I hear from college professors all the time. And that's these students get perfect scores. They go into college thinking, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to be an engineer, I'm going to build amazing things. They hit that first math class, that first physics class, and it's an experience that's completely unlike middle and high school was for them, where the test always looked just like the homework and they could memorize the way through everything. You can't do that anymore. The computers do that better, and colleges don't do that. And that's
So, and we haven't actually mentioned and talked about gifted, and one of the things that my intention was to kind of talk about. So because that sounds like we're talking about a sort of ceiling, a glass ceiling of some sort of not giving opportunities to, I would assume, that would be a good definition of a gifted student who gets all those perfect scores and all those kinds of indicators, but they're butting up against, because of whether it's curriculum or the teaching practices or whatever those factors might be in any given school, what looks like excellent and maxing out, and maybe that's not the right way to put it, but like that headroom is, I mean, what you're trying to offer, as I'm understanding it here, is additional headroom, right? Like ways in which they can go on beyond the limits of whatever the courses and classes and teachers, which doesn't mean that again, let's recognize we've got a class, and most teachers are teaching a class that is wide in variety of skill sets and understandings and abilities and those kinds of things. So I'm not trying to say that these teachers aren't getting it done, but in some ways they aren't getting it done, and there are some valid reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the incentive structures of our entire school system are not set up in a way that teachers are rewarded or even measured or anything on those students, right? Our entire system is set up, clear this bar, clear this baseline bar, get as many kids as you can over this bar. And how far above the bar, don't care, get them over the bar. And as a result, you end up investing a lot in the kids that are near the bar. The kids that are way below the bar, you're not going to get them there. The kids that are way above the bar, they're a problem solved. And they don't see what happens in college. They don't see that these kids are not set up for what's happening in college. And the kids don't see it either. Like if the kids could see it, if the kids knew that these challenges were out there, a lot of them would rise to them. They would go after them themselves. That's what happened with me. I had no idea until somebody put me in front of one of these math contests, and I'm like, I don't even know what these symbols mean. There's more for me to learn here.
Right.
I'm going to go find that out. And I didn't realize that is the skill that you need to get through math or science, or probably in just about anything in college. This ability to see something novel, see something new, a problem you haven't seen before, and take the tools that you already have and throw them on top of that problem. Most of middle and high school, you can get through a math class just by memorizing all those tools and doing it again and again and again. You can do that all the way through the AP calculus test, no problem. And our solution for these students is often acceleration. And I don't want to say acceleration is bad, it's better than nothing. But look at what happens when you accelerate a student. You're accelerating Jane because she's sitting in a fourth grade class board, because the fourth grade class is written for an average fourth grader. But Jane's not average. So we move her up to a seventh grade classroom. That seventh grade classroom is written for an average seventh grader. Jane's still not average. This is still not the right class for her. She needs something that is going to meet her where she's at. And that is thirsting for a challenge, thirsting for something that she doesn't solve in 10 seconds. She needs to be in a class where the average student is like her. And for most students, they don't encounter that until they get to college, whatever their interest is in. We've solved this problem in athletics, right? In athletics, that superstar basketball player gets on the basketball team. They get on an AAU team. They get on a travel soccer team if they're great soccer players. Whatever it is, we've solved this problem there. We've solved it in music to the extent we still do music. That's unfortunate, but we'll set that aside. But in academics, we don't. We cap the kids. Boom, they hit the ceiling, and they don't know. They don't know that it's a tougher world out there. And a richer world like this, that there's this beautiful, amazing stuff out there. And again, it's not the fault of the teachers, but particularly now when all the struggles they have. But it is, even if it's just the structure of the grading system, having this 100 there as an expectation sets kids up to expect that's what good looks like in math, getting 100. So they get to college, and in a strong calculus class in college, 70 is a really good score. Students don't know that because all through middle and high school, they've been getting hundreds, and that was the bar. At a 70 in college, even if you put an A on them, they're reading this as grade inflation, probably right, but 70 is still probably one of the higher scores. And if you tell 70 is a great score, they'll be like, uh-oh, the adults are lying to me again. A great score is always been 100. And so giving them more of those challenges earlier, they're tougher when they're younger. Anyway, 19-year-old hits a challenge for the first time, they're going to quit a lot faster than the 5-year-old. 5-year-olds will quit, but they'll come back.
Yeah.
The 19-year-old.
So art of problem solving is the math travel team, math club team, right? Well, I guess I
think so.
Yeah, maybe the last question, and maybe not, because this may uncover other questions, but like, I'm curious why you think that incentive structure is what it is.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, the mandate of public education is all the students. And that is, that's an honorable, that is, that's an important goal. And then you need to start saying, are we succeeding? So the natural thing to do is to create a line and say, this is the line, and we're going to cross that line, and that's what success looks like. And you can understand that as a starting point. You'd want a more nuanced score system, more nuanced scoreboard than that. It might just be that we haven't developed a rich enough scoreboard to understand this. A good question. Like, that would be my first guess, is just starting from there. Like, it's hard enough to get the system to work to begin with, and if you're going to measurement, you're going to start simple. That is a really good question.
So the couple things I'll throw here that strike me, and I've talked about this in some ways. I mean, so part of it is the sort of economy of scale, right? So we have this large population, and we're trying to develop and implement systems for most of those people, and I think you sort of hinted at that, right? And that doesn't necessarily, and often doesn't, hit the outliers on either end, if you want to look at it as sort of a bell curve, that kind of thing. And there's specialized, I think the analogy to sports is a really useful one here, right? You have, my daughter plays travel soccer, and she's a pretty good soccer player. The main thrust of soccer or basketball or whatever is rec league, which is just an opportunity to participate and get better and reach a sort of at least moderate, decently level of athleticism or skill or whatever. And high school does the same thing. Like, you'll certainly have some really good high school students or teams, but they are limited by the population. One could argue that they recruit, and that's a whole other discussion, but whatever. My other thing, and I'm curious if you've thought about this, and I've thought about this and hypothesized about this a couple times on the podcast as well, is the 1983, the Nation at Risk report, which really pushed forward, especially STEM kind of stuff. Like, we're falling way behind the Russians and everybody else, and really pushed a lot towards STEM, which I don't think that necessarily was the problem, STEM not being the problem, although I do think there's perhaps some imbalances in between different disciplines that are worth paying attention to. But what strikes me is that it shifted our schools to what I would call a culture of achievement, and that with that comes accountability and grades and points and scores, and the measuring sticks by which we say this is a good school, bad school, this is a better school, this is not as good a school. And so the incentive structure there is for teachers to meet those challenges of scores and points and some of those things, and not what I would call a culture of teaching and learning, which is a different set of incentives that doesn't necessarily look at points and scores and grades. It's certainly a part of that, but not the main focus, and that's a lot harder to do, and it's a lot harder to know if a school is going to meet your kids' needs or is meeting your kids' needs. Most people go, oh, that school has good test scores, that must be a good school. That is often far from the truth, right? So I don't know if you've ever thought about that, a Nation at Risk kind of report, and how that might have affected things.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think you're right. Just introducing measurement starts to really skew the incentives.
Right.
That is definitely true. I think the profession of teaching has changed a lot. I don't, like, when I was a student, there were a lot of teachers that gave up a lot of extra time to do a lot of extracurricular things. And I don't know that teachers are doing that as much as my teachers did. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I think it's possible that there were compensation systems when I was in school that empowered the teachers to do that. So, coach the math team, get a couple $1,000 stipend, and all those budgets are gone. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my hypothesis. I have no idea if that's actually true. That makes it harder. But I think that might have opened up some of these extracurricular activities. Once you start measuring, the old adage, what measured gets managed. And I think there is definitely some of that. If you looked at a system that had, when you have a system where there isn't, where by and large most kids go to the school that they're tracked to, you've removed other avenues for information to go out to parents. And I don't want to get into the whole school choice thing, but there's a little bit of, there's a solution that goes in that direction, but that I'm sure you have had plenty of, I know you've had plenty of conversations about, because I've heard a few of them. I don't really know. I'm going to think about this a lot more. It's a very thought-provoking, is how did the system evolve to be where it is? And like, if you're going to talk about things like compete with the Russians, like if you're worried about scientists, it's not raise the mean, it's make access to advanced stuff for everybody, and try to identify those kids for whom that's the right path, and then put them on that path. It shouldn't be make every kid a scientist, because not every kid wants to be a scientist.
No. Well, the way that you stated, so not raising the mean, I mean, because I think that's probably what's in effect happened.
Yeah.
Like we have raised the mean, and more kids are scoring better or doing more math, but that isn't necessarily producing the best and the brightest, or giving opportunities for the best and the brightest in any given sort of discipline or area. And I'll just say one other thing is that as part of my hypothesis, I think the teaching profession has certainly changed. I think there are probably still stipends. I mean, I've been out of the classroom since 2012, but I think there are still stipends for doing extracurriculars and things like that. It's not particularly great. There are other things in noise, but what I would as part of my hypothesis is that, like, my mom was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher. I never had my grandmother as a teacher, but I did have my mom as a teacher. And I'm thinking about the ways in which teachers were able to teach prior to sort of the high-level accountability, in that they could differentiate and if you had the sort of mindset and cognitive dexterity to be able to be a really great teacher, you could be. And that doesn't mean that the teachers were better back then, but those who were capable were more easily able to be great. And now there's depending on where you go, there's just so much more friction in being able to do some of the kinds of teaching that allows for so many tangents and offshoots and those kinds of things. So I don't know.
That's interesting. I mean, a lot of the great teachers I know, when I talk to them about what their school's like and what they're doing, I hear a lot of rule breaking.
Yeah.
Which is exactly, I think, what you're saying. It's interesting that, you're reducing the volatility of the classroom, reduces the volatility of the outcomes.
Yeah, interesting.
That's what you're describing.
Well, let's make sure that folks know where to find you. The artofproblemsolving.com is the website. I'm assuming there's some other places.
Yeah, I mean, also elementary school would be beastacademy.com, and the flagship site is, as you said, artofproblemsolving.com or aops.com. The learning centers are aopsacademy.org, and that'll find us.
Any social media or any other?
We have an AOPS news. We have an AOPS news on Twitter. There's an Art of Problem Solving page. There's a Beast Academy page on Facebook. Our YouTube, we have, I think it's like 400 videos for middle school and some contest math up there. There you can see a much younger version of me, a bunch of math problems.
Gotcha. Well, we'll try to link to as many of those as we can in the show notes. And of course, when folks are listening on iTunes, those won't be linked. So they'll have to go to our webpage or just Art of Problem Solving. I'm sure you get links to those things as well. Richard, it's been a pleasure. And thanks so much for the time.
All right. Thank you as well. I really enjoyed it.
All right, let me hit